Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining me to talk about our ethical, legal and social responsibilities for health genomics research in Africa. I'm Nicki Tiffin. I work at the South African National Bioinformatics Institute at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. I've deliberately chosen to talk about our ethical, legal and social responsibilities because I think we often refer to them as challenges, which makes them sound like something we should be working around or trying to overcome. Whereas I actually think responsibilities, we should be embracing our ethical, legal and social responsibilities when we do research and undertaking them to the best of our abilities. I think it's always helpful to start with a reminder why we actually do health genomics research in Africa and why it's important to promote health genomics research on the continent. Firstly, African participants are very much underrepresented in health genomics research globally. And we have in Africa, Africans have very ancient and highly diverse genomes, as well as having specific health challenges and needs. We've got a high burden of infectious diseases. A lot of countries still, the populations are still undergoing epidemiological transition, and we have a combination of infectious disease and non-communicable diseases as comorbidities. And also we have so many unique and diverse environments across the continent that may not be found elsewhere globally. Despite this, many of the diagnostics and therapeutics that are currently available are designed specifically for non-African populations and are often tested in non-African populations. But African participants have a lot to offer health genomics research because of these highly diverse genomes. And our research that we undertake in African populations can really inform the global knowledge base and help us to better understand disease etiology and response to therapies. I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that data and biospecimen governance occurs across the entire research ecosystem. This can be people-centric, such as ethics, community engagement, informed consent processes, and also how we develop the careers of our junior scientists and offer them mentoring, and how we present our research to the general public and ensure that they benefit from what's ongoing. And then there are also processes and infrastructure for training, for actual governance and management of data, and for data integration and sharing, meta-analysis. And then also, how do the different components of the ecosystem talk to each other? For example, how do healthcare systems and research systems integrate successfully? In order to ensure we're responsible about ethics and governance across this research ecosystem, we really need to be looking at how we balance benefits and risks arising from the genomics research that we do. And to do this, we actually have to understand what creates a risk and what's considered a risk, and also understand what's considered a benefit. To do this effectively, we really have to have local context and local understanding. It's absolutely essential. So that means talking to local stakeholders right from the planning stages of projects, ensuring there's a local ethics review board that's reviewing proposals and ensuring that they're appropriate. It can be quite tricky to understand what's culturally acceptable or not acceptable, and we have such cultural diversity in Africa. That it's really important to make sure that the understanding that we have is from stakeholders in the context where the research will take place. It's important that we have sensitive reporting practices to ensure that we mitigate risks to the populations and the subgroups that we ask to participate in our research. And then we have to also agree with our stakeholders, our local stakeholders, what's appropriate in terms of the informed consent protocols. And this is not only about what's culturally acceptable and what's understandable, but also what is the local legislation, what's allowed and what's not allowed, and what is expected for informed consent protocols. And then finally, it's also important up front to have all the stakeholders involved to agree how the data and the biospecimens are going to be shared for the current study, but possibly also for other studies in the future, if those are data that can be shared onward. There's been quite a lot of talk and ongoing conversations about how we need to do better benefit sharing when we do health genomics research across Africa. And we know that we need to build in mechanisms from the proposal writing stage to ensure that benefit sharing happens not only for primary studies, but also from the onward use of resources. And we also want to include benefit sharing discussions at the community engagement stage of developing protocols and planning for research. But it can be quite difficult to know how to actually do benefit sharing. What does it look like when you're doing benefit sharing on the ground? So with the PHAGE Ethics and Data Sharing Working Group, we've built a very pragmatic approach to benefit sharing. We've actually developed a framework that's designed to help identify who are the stakeholders and what are the types of benefits that they might be able to receive from health research and health genomics research, particularly in the Global South. We looked at different types of benefits from financial, health and well-being, infrastructure and capacity development. And we also thought about career development and who gets attributed, who gets recognized for research. And those types of benefits we put into a matrix with the socio-ecological model as a way to define who our stakeholders might be, all the way from individuals, individual participants, individual researchers, small community groups and families, and then getting through the meso and macro layers of the socio-ecological model right up to the regional, national and international stakeholders. And we've used this framework of identifying stakeholders and types of benefits to propose a way for identifying what kind of benefits might be shared and who might benefit in different ways when doing research. So we hope that this is going to be useful in terms of actually planning what benefit sharing is going to look like when people are developing their proposals. And this framework is already available. We published it in BMJ Global Health early this year. So we're trying to make it very hands-on and very descriptive to make it easier to do benefit sharing. So I'm hoping that that will be of use to people planning their research, particularly in Africa, but more widely in the Global South. As I mentioned earlier, the point of the ethical kind of assessment is to look at not only the benefits of research, but also the risks. And we need to work out who's taking the risks, also across this wide range of stakeholders. And the risks can be taken all the way through from the individuals up to communities, institutional risks, and again, all the way up to the macro level, which is national, regional, international. And again, we're working through the PHAGE Ethics and Data Sharing Working Group at identifying the types of risks and producing, again, a framework that helps us understand who's taking the risks, what types of risks are they taking. And then this allows us with these two, looking at the risks, looking at the benefits, to also have a look and see who takes the risks and who gets the benefits. And hopefully we will be able to design our programs more effectively at this stage to match up who takes risks and who gets benefits. And this helps us to protect against inequitable research, and it helps us to ensure that we don't have a lot of risk-taking, perhaps with the Global South partners, and a lot of benefits occurring for the Global North partners, and a kind of disconnect between the risks and benefit stakeholders. Once we're confident we understand the risks and the potential benefits of our research, our next responsibility is really to communicate those very clearly to research participants through providing good participant information and informed consent protocols, so that the research participants will know exactly how their data and biospecimens will be used, including for onward sharing. And we also like to provide opportunities for participants to select their own level of comfort with what kind of onward use they agree to. So we tend to use tiered consent, agreeing for samples and data to be used in multiple different ways. So for the example I've given here is that the participant can agree to the current study, but they can agree also to other similar studies. So for example, for the same disease type, perhaps. And then if they still agree further, they can agree for their samples and data to be used also in other health-related studies. But they're able to say no at the point that they start to feel uncomfortable with the amount of onward sharing that's being proposed. We've produced several publications also to assist with the process of building participant information and undertaking the informed consent process with potential research participants. And I just listed them here. Again, they're very practical kind of tools that can help people who wish to build a modular kind of approach or a tiered approach to informed consent. And we have also made an electronic e-consent template using a tiered consent approach for health genomics research. It's particularly designed for African participants. And it's currently under review, and I hope will be available soon. So I'll just finish up by talking very briefly about a new project that I have starting up. And this is African Data and Biospecimen Exchange. We've started this year to build an online platform that will facilitate the equitable sharing of African data and biospecimens. So it's physically situated in Africa. I'm the PI, so it's at SANBI at UWC in South Africa. And the aim of this platform is to directly connect the resource generators, so people who have generated data sets or biospecimen collections, and data or biospecimen consumers, the people who want to actually use those in onward studies. And the two can get connected and set up their own bilateral resource sharing agreements through the platform. So the platform will not do any data or biospecimen centralization. We'll only host metadata about the data sets and the sample collections. And that will be queryable metadata and standardized metadata about what kind of data set we have, or what kind of biospecimen collection is available for sharing. And then as well, we're building the infrastructure that will create collaboration agreements. So the data and biospecimen sharing agreements or benefit sharing agreements. So all of this, when the platform is completed, all of this can be done on the platform. The resources will be there to make sure that we can set up fit for purpose data sharing agreements, biospecimen sharing agreements, and that they can be negotiated on an individualized basis between someone who's holding data or biospecimen collections to share and someone who's very keen to share them. So this is a very exciting project that we've started, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this can help to facilitate data and biospecimen sharing for resources that have been generated on the continent. I think it's also important to note that the exchange is not intended to replace any existing resource sharing requirements, but rather to facilitate them and to provide a platform for the actual sharing agreements to take place. So it will synergize with ongoing and new programs to facilitate data and biospecimen sharing. We've got the H3 Africa data that could be shared through this platform, and the DSI Africa program, which is kicking off now. The APCC Welcome African Population Cohorts Consortium will also be generating more data, etc., etc. There are very many fantastic programs on the continent that are generating exciting data and exciting biospecimen collections. So the platform will be available for any organization or any researchers that would like to advertise that they have data or biospecimens that are available for sharing according to whatever conditions are in place. So I hope I've managed to outline some of the responsibilities that we really need to be thinking about when we're undertaking health genomics research on the African continent and across the African continent. So I hope we'll have some good discussion around this. I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to acknowledge funding from the Welcome City Africa program where I was working until recently, and then also the, ongoing funding from H3A Bionet, which is the part of the NIH H3 Africa Consortium, and then of course the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation Calestis Tumor Fellowship, which will make the building of the African Data and Biospecimen Exchange possible. And then I've got so many fantastic LC and data governance collaborators on the continent. And I also have these participate in these wonderful working groups with ICDA, FAGE, and IHCC. And then I'd also like to acknowledge my collaborators at the PHDC in the Western Cape Government Health and various collaborators across Africa. I couldn't fit them all on the slide, but it's a pleasure working with all of you.
Colleagues, I'm going to be speaking today about achieving equity in international health research collaborations. And this is predicated on work and a publication led by Marlene Farrer together with other colleagues, including Ntobeko Ntusi, who is in attendance today, Bridget Pratt, as well as Yantina de Vries. And many of you will be aware, by way of introduction, that while global health research often involves international collaborations, achieving or promoting equity within these collaborations can be very difficult indeed. And despite many established conceptual approaches on how this should be done, and there have been a few studies that have been published highlighting some of the challenges that currently exist in promoting equity in such international health research collaborations. And so we thought that there were a number of key gaps that still remained. And in order to address these gaps, we conducted a scoping review of studies published in the last 10 years. And the initial search yielded over 7,000 studies, but ultimately there were about 11 that met the criteria. And there were 10 key domains that were identified from the scoping review that we summarized as being important for promoting equity within health research collaborations. And these included funding, 2, capacity building, 3, authorship, 4, sample ownership and export, 5, the building of trust, 6, research agreements, 7, acknowledging inequality that exists, 8, recognition of partners and what they bring to the collaboration, and then finally, communication. And we have made a recommendation or a framework that we believe and hope, if utilized by funding bodies, by those setting up new collaborations, may provide a template for enabling better equity within these working relationships. And so what I will do in the next 10 minutes is really to speak about each one of these key elements of the framework in a little bit of detail. So if we take the first one, which is funding, it was identified by most of the reports as being a central determinant of equity. And participants described that since research funding primarily originates from the global north, power within research collaborations tends to be also located with northern partners. And so one needs to take a considered and quite active set of actions to try and deal with this. And we think that participants need to be constantly mindful, as in our study, they lamented their own dependency on northern funders, since there was a serious lack of funding for research coming either from local governments or those based in the global south. The second key component of this framework really relates to how the approach that one takes to building capacity. And many of the studies that we reviewed went into great detail on how this can be a critical enabler of equity within these research partnerships. And so the building of capacity extends beyond just training, but also to grant writing skills, methodological and analytical skills, formal qualifications for postgraduate students, and increasingly being able to provide mentored leadership positions for different partners. And this thinking about capacity building necessarily needs to be liberal and must extend to looking at infrastructural support as well as capacity that is enabled through granting of opportunities within the collaborative work. The third key component that we identified was the importance of authorship within scientific collaborations, and the current model that exists in many of these global health partnerships, where the first and last author tend to come from northern countries. And so one, again, needs to be intentional as part of your capacity development strategy to ensure that there is a authorship agreement plan, and ideally such a plan needs to promote the promotion of first and last author coming from the global south. And importantly, these need to be agreed quite early on in setting up these relationships so that at the point of writing papers, they don't become issues of contention. Another key consideration relates to agreement around sample ownership and export, and many Southern researchers have found that global health collaborations tend to be exploitative, where they see themselves as institutions that are being used to generate samples that are shipped, analyzed in the global north. The key publications are led by people from the global north, and importantly, those samples remain with global north partners who may use them for subsequent analysis without permission or even knowledge of the people who've collected the samples. And so it's really important that ownership, curatorship, and management of shared samples collected through the collaborative research are clarified upfront. And then fifth is the importance of research contracts and agreements, where it's important that these are equitable. The details of the collaboration must be spelled out clearly, including how the funding will be spent, the division of labor, the decision-making arrangements, as well as authorship policies, as I've mentioned, clearly agreed upfront. And then the next really important aspect of building these collaborations is how they respond to local priorities rather than being purely driven either by the priorities of the global north partners or being driven by the needs of the funding agencies. And so there needs to be a clear effort to try and understand where the opportunities are to strengthen the systems, processes, and institutions of global South partners, and again, ensure that their priorities are reflected and respected in these partnerships. Trust was probably one of the most important relational aspects that were highlighted in building these equitable partnerships. And so there needs to be a relationship of trust that enables respect, collegiality, as well as successful conduct of the work. There is a recognition that trust often takes a long time to build, and so successful collaborative agreements are often those that are nurtured in iterative roles through different collaborative arrangements. And then it's really important also that the partners from high-income and low and middle-income countries go into these relationships and openly acknowledge the existing inequality. And this is an important starting point. And if one sort of brushes this aside, they may continue to rear their ugly head. And these need to be acknowledged, and there must be a clear plan of how they will be handled through the collaborative work that follows. There also needs to be an important recognition of the strengths and contributions that different partners bring to these collaborations, and to recognize the skills, the abilities, the local expertise, as well as the experience that different partners bring into these collaborations. And our views on capacity building were also reflected in this aspect of the framework. And if one is not careful around how you recognize the contributions and strengths of different partners, you may end up either invalidating or devaluing what people can bring meaningfully into these collaborations. And then finally, communication is absolutely key. And this emerged as a very important ingredient for the creation of equitable relationships. And one needs to firstly have a strategy for how you communicate between partners. You need to have clarity around what the important things to communicate will be. And three, to have an agreement on how that communication will occur. And so beyond the structural and relational elements, the publication really highlighted the fact that the identified domains map different components of social justice, which were identified, which we thought were absolutely key in building these equitable relationships. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to conclude by saying that we believe that our proposed framework provides a template for achieving both social and distributive justice, as well as writing unequal power relations like subordination, highlighting the importance of individual as well as group recognition and affirmation, as well as promoting the well-being of all partners involved in these international health research collaborations. So I wish to end by acknowledging the important role Malin Favre played in leading this work, as well as other collaborators, as well as his funding from the Wellcome Trust. And thank you for your attention.